What's up you guys, Gong Rong Zong here. So, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order has received renowned praise from all the big game review companies so far. But, unpopular opinion or not, I really didn't find that it was that great a game. Don't get me wrong, it's a good Star Wars game, and I enjoyed certain parts of it very much. But when compared to similar titles of its genre, and coming in at a pretty hefty price tag for a single player only game that I completed in about 20 or so hours at the second highest difficulty level, I just felt like it didn't really deserve the 9 out of 10 rating that it received. Perhaps a 7 out of 10 would be more appropriate, if I had to tag a rating to it. Let me explain why. The first thing that I need to emphasize for those of you that haven't played the game yet or are considering buying it is that it isn't a lightsaber combat game. Yes, there is lightsaber combat in it, but I would dare say that at least half, if not more, of the game, and hence the time you actually spend playing the game, will actually be devoted to solving puzzles, doing Jedi parkour, or simply exploring the map and getting lost very often. Hence why I placed the phrase "the jumping Jedi" in the title. Jumping, 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 and endless jumping. In fact, from the very beginning of the game, it already starts you off with a pretty comprehensive tutorial not about combat, but about how to jump from platform to platform or how to shimmy from ledge to ledge. Before engaging in combat with any batch of enemies, you will have to jump over numerous obstacles just to reach them. Every single time. Let me just repeat that because it isn't an exaggeration. Every batch of enemies is, for whatever reason, always divided between some obstacle that you will have to use your parkour skills to overcome. You have to slide down endless ice or mud slopes while dodging obstacles. You will have to swing from rope to make over each and every crack in the ground. You will have to run along the walls numerous times just to reach a destination that is clearly just in front of you. And while it doesn't seem bad at all, and it inherently isn't, the game just started to get incredibly tedious when all of this had to be combined with, you guessed it, puzzle solving. There are many puzzles that you will have to solve in Fallen Order, and while none of them are particularly difficult, I managed to figure them all out on my own without googling anything. By God were they tedious and time consuming. They will all involve a combination of some sort of your push and pull force powers, and jumping from some ledge to some platform. At this point I may sound frustrated, but honestly, it's more along the lines of slight disappointment. The main draw of a game like this is uncontested. It is, and will always be, about the lightsaber combat. And in Fallen Order, it goes along the lines of something like 50% puzzle solving and exploration, and 50% combat. After 20 hours or so that I played the game, I dare say that at least 10 hours of it was spent running around the world, getting lost trying to figure out how to get to a destination, or simply scratching my head trying to solve a puzzle. But I've yet to share about the getting lost part, so let's get into that. In Fallen Order, you are going to get lost. A lot. Like a freaking lot. I got so bloody lost in this game so many times and had to constantly run the same paths back and forth, killing the same batches of enemies again and again in trying to reach my objective. The main reason for this is the map. The damn map. The map in Fallen Order comes from your cute little droid BD-1, but to make it realistic, the developers decided to make the map a 3D hologram with multiple levels to boot. And as is with many game features, once you make something realistic, by God does it become super inconvenient for the player. I have no idea what made them come to this final decision about the map. As a theoretical idea, it's brilliant. It falls in line completely with a Star Wars fantasy. But from a user experience point of view, certainly someone must have voiced out how impractical this is. For the first few hours of the game, I couldn't make heads or tails of the map, and even when I gradually got used to it, I barely referred to it again, and instead relied on my own memory of the paths and visual landmarks to get to the destination. I'm confident that no matter how good you are, and unless you have an eidetic memory like Sheldon Cooper, you are going to be spending a big chunk of your time running around aimlessly, constantly getting lost. I don't want to spend any amount of time, and to make it worse in this game, it's a significant chunk of time, getting lost or scratching my head solving puzzles that involve pushing giant balls on a ramp in a game that is supposed to deliver a Jedi experience. And for me, a Jedi experience is all about the lightsaber battles, and the growth of the character from Padawan to Master. So let's talk about the lightsaber and Force combat first, what is essentially the gameplay. The combat in Fallen Order is good. It's not great, but it's good. It checks all the boxes of lightsaber combat. It's fast, it's fluid, it's polished. You can feel the weight, or in this case, the weightlessness of the lightsaber blade in your hand. The style of lightsaber combat that your character uses, I'm not sure which one this is, I know there are many different types of sword fighting in the Star Wars universe, looks great. Your character is agile but not unrealistically so, and the movements are crisp and believable. You feel like a Jedi wielding a lightsaber in this game. You feel as though your own two hands are wielding the lightsaber, and that's a great thing. But unfortunately, that's where the best part of the combat ends. While skill points do unlock more styles of lightsaber combat, such as the iconic throwing of your saber, or charging forward and thrusting it straight ahead, combat primarily revolves around the typical mechanics of light attacks, heavy attacks, parries, and dodges. Everything else was just basically fluff. And while there's nothing wrong with this type of variety, there was also nothing original about it at all. There are countless other games that have already used such a combat formula, from Sekiro to Dark Souls. Parry when you need to, dodge on attacks that cannot be parried, and strike when there's an opening. A basic attack when there's a small opening, and a riskier heavy attack when there's a bigger opening. The Force attacks didn't really help either, as you were only presented with 3 options: the Force Pull, Force Push, and Force Slow. That's it. Push, pull, slow. Where were the iconic Jedi mind tricks? The telepathy, the projection of images, the mind control? Where were the force fields or the stunts? Definitely, it ties into the lore that your main character would only know the basics, as he was a mere Padawan that only had a few years of training. But such a backstory really resulted in combat with your force powers being shallow at best. It would have been easy to design a deeper story in which he got additional force training along the way, rather than just to rely on his memories. Plus, he did spend his entire journey with an experienced Jedi who could have eventually shared many of these skills with him. But currently, you simply either push the enemy away, pull him to you, or just slow him. To make matters worse, combat in this game is heavily skewed towards your lightsaber. Anything categorized as a large category or above, including bosses, seem to be effectively immune to your force powers, forcing you to fall back upon the simple formula of parries, dodges, and strikes with your saber. There were some entertaining moments whereby you could push an enemy off the edge of a cliff, resulting in his immediate death. But by and large, for any fight that truly mattered, or any mob that was above average difficulty, you couldn't use the environment to your advantage. Now, I'm not saying that they should reinvent the wheel, most definitely not, but I truly felt that the whole thing carrying the gameplay, or I might even go to the extent to say masking the flaws of the gameplay, was the fact that it was a Star Wars brand, and that you were wielding a lightsaber. If this was another company producing a similar style game that was based on, say, just medieval swords and shields with no giant brand behind them, I dare say that many more would be poking holes at the gameplay. If it were to be broken down to its fundamentals, the combat was good. It was simple and easy to get into, but it's very hard to classify it in my mind as one of the greats or memorable. Talking about the combat, let me share a bit more about the actual fights. While there are many elements similar to Dark Souls, the fights are nowhere as difficult as it. For one, you can actually change the difficulty of the game whenever you want. So if you really got stuck at a boss and you wanted to throw your dignity away, nah, I'm just kidding. If you really got stuck at a boss, you could tone it down a notch whenever you wanted. I played the game at the second highest difficulty, as I was pretty convinced that I would be pulling my hair out at the highest, and I would have to say it was a pretty enjoyable experience. The fights at that difficulty to me weren't too difficult, but they weren't too easy either. Some of the bosses I died to multiple times, the most probably being 10 or so times, and got stuck at him for about an hour or so. And while it was frustrating, I stuck through with it because it was oh so satisfying when I finally defeated him. But the good news is that it's definitely not a game that you could get perpetually stuck at a boss for. Over time, and over many deaths, you will kind of start to learn about the boss's attack patterns, and when and where would be the best time to strike. In that respect, it was very much like Dark Souls. Button mashing will get you nowhere in this game against the harder mobs and bosses. I spent more time rolling on the floor dodging than actually doing lightsaber strikes. You will have to learn to read and analyze enemy movements before making calculated hits on a target. One wrong move at the higher difficulties often would result in you taking a huge hit or death, but that also made the harder fights that much more fulfilling when you conquered them. My only criticism of the fights would be that there were too few of them. The quality was there, but unfortunately the quantity was not. Fallen Order is a relatively short game, about 20 hours or so, and as I previously mentioned, with about half the time spent solving puzzles or exploring, the fights were few and far between, much less the actual boss fights. I dare say that if there were twice the number of bosses in this game, it could very well reach the ranks of one of the all-time great. However, combat does not make a game, unless you're playing something like Metal Slug. In any Star Wars game, novel or movie, especially coming on the foundations of a giant like Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, the story and character development have to be factored into the game, and especially so in what is essentially an RPG, even if this could be argued to be a pseudo-action RPG at that. And unfortunately, it again falls into the category of okay. It's not terrible, but it's not great either. Character development is, in a nutshell, typical, bland, and shallow. That's not me being harsh, but merely describing it for what it is. I'm going to lightly touch on a few points of the story here, but for those of you that haven't played the game yet, not to worry, as I won't delve into the actual details. The overarching story simply involves your ordinary Star Wars Padawan that goes through his stereotypical journey of conquering various obstacles and overcoming his fears to embrace the Force and become a fully fledged Jedi. And while there's nothing wrong with this story, it seemed like a really safe route to take, almost Disney movie-like in comparison. From the beginning, you kind of already know how the story is going to pan out. In Fallen Order, good guys win, bad guys lose. To add to this, it's pretty damn clear who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. It's black and white, with no in-between. And I really felt like they lost a good opportunity here to make something really great. A deeper exploration could be made of the light side and dark side of the Force, in how potential Force users struggle immensely with this dilemma. However, while it is an actual subject of the game, it is superficially elaborated upon, and quickly falls back to the light side good, dark side bad dynamic. The main character barely even struggles with this, and while going through seemingly traumatic events, seems entirely unfazed and goes back to, nah, light side is my homie forever. There was very little internal struggle with the Force, in contrast to the most recent Star Wars movie for Kylo Ren in his damaged struggle between family and ambition, or even in Anakin, in how his falling to the dark side was catalyzed by an act of love to save his wife. To make matters worse, all, and I mean all, of the NPCs that you encounter in the game are very forgettable. In fact, I honestly don't even remember their names anymore as I record this review. Their dialogue consists of bland 2 to 3 liners that do very little to enhance their characters, and their personalities contribute very little to the main character's growth or journey. For those of you that have played the game, like, what? Who? This Night Sister? What was her contribution in joining the team? She came in and I was like, oh shit, badass, we got a freaking Night Sister. And then she simply sits in the ship looking pretty like a damsel and does nothing besides a fancy magic trick that could be duplicated with a simple cloaking technology. A major letdown, if anything. In short, nothing about this story was really memorable. Actually no, I take that back. BD1 was super memorable and super epic, but that speaks volumes of the entire game, in how a voiceless droid is the most memorable and in-depth character amongst a host of others that have an actual voice and apparently deep backstories. That isn't to say, of course, that there aren't good moments in the game. There were quite a few of them. One of these was the music, which was just phenomenal. Everything about this high orchestral theme just screamed Star Wars. Another would be the cinematics, which were awesome to sit back and take in. Or the fights against iconic enemies, from AT-AT droids to enemy Jedi with their own force powers, or to the final boss, which gave me the biggest holy shit and I'm sure jizzable moment for any hardcore Star Wars fan. Or the memorable moments and bonds formed with BD-1, your loyal droid, reminiscent of the bond Anakin formed with R2-D2. But unfortunately, these moments are the frosting on top of the cake, of which the actual cake itself, the core of the game, is nothing special. What this Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order game really is a game of huge potential that unfortunately only culminated in a lukewarm result, and for that reason, I cannot justify buying it at its full price. EA should be commended for finally producing a good single player experience without any of the stupid microtransactions, and they should be further encouraged to produce more of these kind of games without a money grubbing attitude. And while I do believe that purchasing the game will help to send them the message that this is what we as consumers want, I believe it's only worth purchasing at about a 20% discount or higher, due to its really high price tag for a single player 20-hour experience that has good features, but nothing great or outstanding.